Hey, remember back in the day when things were simpler and you could use jQuery without any build or bundler tools, without any setup or configuration, and without having to have a doctorate degree in the philosophy of that framework? I remember that. Those were good times. And while jQuery still gets 5 million downloads per week on NPM, it's not the tool that the cool kids use any longer. However, there is an amazing framework named Alpine that is very modern, very lightweight, and easy to learn, and it reminds me of that simple jQuery feeling. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this page with Alpine.js. So this is a sneak peek preview of the finished product of what we're going to build together. Essentially, we're going to retrieve JSON from this external URL. We're just going to use fetch to pull in this data, and then we're going to loop through these three pets to display them like this. So there's a toggle age button that reveals and hides their age, and then there's also a delete pet button. If you delete all of the pets, you get an whoops, you have no pets message. Cool. Now without further ado, let's actually start building this together with Alpine. Okay, so first of all, I want you to open up this starting follow-along CodePen that I've already created for you. You'll find a link to this URL in the description of this video, but essentially you can get started coding with Alpine right away. In fact, all you need to get started with Alpine is just to include this external JavaScript file, and that's it. You don't need a build tool or a bundler tool or any sort of workflow. You just include this file and you're good to go. Cool. So this CodePen has just basic static HTML and CSS to get us this visual design, right, of the animal cards. In other words, this has zero JavaScript applied to it. This is just a starting place that you and I can both begin with. Cool. So let me show you how we get started. I'm going to jump into VS Code just so it takes up the full screen and it's easier for you to follow along. But essentially, in our HTML, we want to begin fetching data from this URL. So if you want to, in this comment towards the top, you can copy and paste that URL into a new tab. And when you do that, you'll see that it's just an array, or an object with a property named pets, and that's an array with 3 objects inside of it. So let's fetch this using client-side JavaScript, but let's do it sort of the Alpine way. Let me show you what I would do. So back in our code, in our HTML, you'll see that we have this div with a class of all pets. On this opening div tag, after the class, let's give it another attribute of x-data equals, and now in these quotes, yes, in HTML, this looks like a simple string of text, but because we're using Alpine, in these quotes, we can just have, curly brackets for a JavaScript object, and now we can start spelling out properties. So ultimately, we're going to have a property named pets and set that, so colon, to just an empty array. Now, in just a minute or two, that's what we're actually going to want, but let me show you how to get started with a quick test first. So like, for example, if we wanted a property called sky color and, colon, and give it a value of blue, you would have, single quotes because we're already within these double quotes. So like blue. Now, how would you actually access that? Well, inside this div now, let's imagine we just want like a heading level 1, that outputs that dynamic value of blue. What you actually do is on the opening tag of whatever element you're working with, you just say x-text equals, and then you would just say sky color. It's that easy. Now, if I save that and check this page in the browser, refresh, there you go. You see blue. So it's this easy to set data, and then anywhere within this, this div, this element, this component, we can easily access our x data. Cool. Now we don't actually want a heading level 1. Let me get rid of that. And we don't actually want, sky color. So instead, in these curly brackets, let's say, have a property of pets, colon. Let's have it be an empty array for now. But better yet, let's go fetch the JSON that lives at this URL. So here's what I would do. After these quotes, let's have another HTML attribute named x-init equals, quotes. And now in these quotes, we are free to include JavaScript. So let's just say, we already have a variable named pets. Let's just set pets to equal, and then let's await, and then let's just fetch something. So fetch, in the parentheses for fetch, when you're calling it, you would give it single quotes, because remember, we're already within these traditional double quotes, but single quotes, and then just paste in the JSON URL from up here that we would want to fetch. So just paste that here. And now at this point, we need to think about what a fetch actually returns. So fetch is going to return a promise. And then on the promise that it returns, you can call the JSON method, right? But even the JSON method returns a promise that you need to await itself. So in other words, normally you would say like const data equals await fetch, and you would have multiple lines of code. But in order to spell this out on a single line of code, what I think we should do is just wrap this in parentheses. So like right before the word await here, opening parentheses, and then right at the end, just, another closing parentheses. And now at the very start of this line, before the opening parentheses await, we can have another await, just like this. And then at the end, with the double closing parentheses, we can say, .json, call the .json method. And so that is what the first or the outer await is awaiting. So the inner await, this is just the initial fetch. Then this is going to await the JSON promise. Now, if we look at the shape of our data in the browser really quick, so just the raw JSON, you'll notice that it's an object that has a property named pets. In other words, the only thing we're actually interested in is just this array. So what I would do is when we're saying pets equals, I would just destructure the incoming object from that URL. So instead of just pets equals, I would say curly brackets pets equals. I'm sort of just pulling out the property from the incoming object. That's all I'm interested in. Cool. The idea though now is we have this variable simply named pets, and we can access it anywhere from within this overall div. We didn't need to go into a JavaScript file. Alpine just enabled us to do this with xdata and xinit. So now you might be wondering, cool, but how do we loop through an array? Well, Alpine makes it very easy. So check this out. Inside our overall div, but before this div with a class of pet card, so maybe right about here, I want you to include an element, sort of an element sandwich of template. So opening and closing template tags, just like this. On the opening template tag, we can say something we can give it an attribute of x-for. So just like a for loop, right? Equals, quotes. And we're just going to say pet in pets. So in other words, we're looping through our pets variable, and each singular instance will be available from this pet variable, singular. So now inside the template, just for a quick test, let's have like a heading level 3 and say x-text equals pet.name. You can give that a save. Let me go reload. Beautiful. We see a heading level 3 for each of our 3 animals. Cool. Now remember, our raw JSON has not just name, but also species, an array of their favorite foods, their birth year, and a URL to an image. So in other words now, let's just hollow out this HTML template with our real dynamic data. So all you would need to do down here, just copy the pet card div. So just select this entire div that has a class of pet card. Just copy that into your clipboard, then you can delete it. And then inside our template, we don't need the heading level 3. Inside our template, you can just paste in your clipboard. And now let's just start to hollow this out. Let's actually skip the image for now. We'll circle back to that in just a minute. Let's start with the name of the animal. So you would get rid of this heading level 2 value of name goes here, and instead you would say, x-text equals pet.name. Let's fill in the species, right? So instead of dog, and now you might be wondering, hey, we're already in the paragraph element, like right here where the cursor is, so what should we do? I would probably just add a span element, and then on that you could say x-text equals, pet.species. Cool, let's do the same thing for their favorite foods. So, you would leave favorite foods : but then we would have a span and say, x-text equals quotes pet.fav foods. And before we go any further with the, toggle age or delete buttons, let's just save this and see what we have. Cool, so I see some good news and bad news. We have 3 animal cards. Beautiful, we have their name, we see their species, we do see their favorite foods. However, we need a little bit of work here. You can see that this first one, it's trying to bold the word any, but instead of actually being treated as HTML, it's actually showing the literal HTML. So we need to fix that. And also, notice that barks a lot. In the array of data, he doesn't have any food. So if their favorite foods array is empty, we don't even need to display this favorite foods : So let me show you how I would fix these issues. First of all, let's make sure that this favorite food actually gets displayed as HTML. Like this should actually be bold instead of literally just strong. So all you do is on the favorite foods, instead of x-text, it would just be x-html. So if I give that a save, cool, now it's actually getting interpreted as legitimate HTML. Now let's learn how to have this favorite foods area be conditional, right? If an animal doesn't have any favorite foods, we don't need to display this whatsoever. So here's what I would do. I would find that favorite foods paragraph, just cut the entire thing into your clipboard temporarily. We're going to need it back in 10 seconds from now. But in its place, I would just have an opening and closing template sandwich. On the opening template, I would say x-if equals, and then just if pet.favefoods. As long as that exists, this will evaluate to true. If it's true, then only then will we display what's in the template. So just paste back in your clipboard. So we can save that. Beautiful. So now purrs loud has favorite foods, but barks a lot doesn't even list that paragraph at all. Cool. Next up, let's actually display their image element. So the reason I saved that is because it's a little bit different here. So instead of just outputting text or HTML into sort of the middle of an element, with an image, you're trying to fill in the attribute. So in other words, how would you use a dynamic property as an attribute here instead of this src value? My first instinct was to just go up into this address and say, pet.image. However, that will not work, right? I can hit save. You can see that will fail miserably. So what you need to do is we need to bind a property to this attribute. Now you could say x-bind : src. If I save that, that should work. Whoops, the property name is not .image, it would be .photo. So if you look at the JSON, you'll see there's a property named photo. So if I save that, refresh, cool. So the correct photos load, but now just to prove that you need to use bind, right? Now that I'm using the correct photo name. So if I got rid of that and just said, src source, you can see it does not work. What's cool though, instead of x-bind : you can actually just get rid of the x-bind and just have the preceding colon in front of the attribute, and that's the exact same thing as x-bind. It's just a bit of a shortcut syntax. So I can save that. Beautiful. Okay, next, let's set up the toggle age button, right? So that their age is hidden at first, but then when you click it, it should display here, and then if you click it again, it should hide it. So the first thing I would do is add a bit of data on the specific pet that we're working with. So here's the template where we're looping through our pets. So in other words, this div that has a class of pet card, that's for the specific pet in question. So what I would do is just on that div, I would say x-data equals, spell out an object, and I would just have a property, and I'm making up this name. It could be anything, pizza, unicorn, whatever, but I'm making up a name of show age, and let's give it a default value of false. Cool. So now here's what we would do. Down here on the button that says, toggle the age, we would just have an on-click event that when you click it, it just flips this value to be whatever the opposite of its current value would be. So what I would do on this button that has a class of cool button, I would say x-on : click equals, and now just have a JavaScript expression, right? So I would just say show age should now equal the opposite of whatever show age currently is. Cool. Now, right below that button, let's add a new line. And now let's just have a bit of text, so a span. And on the opening tag, we'd say x-text equals pet.birth year. Now that will just display all the time. So if I save that and refresh, you're going to see their birth year or their age at all times. But now here's what we can do to have it be hidden initially. Or in other words, have it display based on whether this is true or false. We would just say on the opening span, x-show, right? And now you would give this a value of either true or false. But instead of actually literally saying true or false, just set it to our show age property. And then better yet, instead of it just disappearing and reappearing in 1 millisecond, you can have it sort of slowly transition or animate in a tiny bit. You can just say x-transition. If I give that a save, let's test it out. So we don't see the age, but as soon as you click the purple toggle age button, beautiful, you can click it again to hide it. At this point, let's switch gears and set up the delete pet button. So when I click this, what I would essentially want to do is delete this pet object from our array of 3 pets. Now there's a million different ways you could do that. In the real world, you'd probably have a unique ID for this specific pet, right? Some like 16 character long ID. We don't have that because if you look at our JSON, it's just, each pet is just an object. So what I would do to get creative is just whichever one you click on, I'm going to delete that index in this array, right? So arrays are zero based, so number 0, number 1, number 2. Just delete the appropriate one. So here's what I would do. Let's find our delete button down here. You can see it has a class of delete pet. Let's give it another attribute of x-on::click equals quotes. And now I have no idea if this is the official Alpine way of doing things. Like for example, in React, you never directly mutate any data, right? You always use the React functions and let React handle or, sort of set the next version of the state for you. I am not a guru when it comes to Alpine. In fact, I just first learned about Alpine yesterday. So this might not be the official way, but what I would do is just directly mutate our pet's property to no longer have this pet in it. So literally, I would just say pets equals pets.filter, and then I would just return a new array that is missing whichever pet you just clicked on to delete. I believe Alpine has a store functionality, which is probably, the official or correct way of doing this. But for me, half the fun I've been having with Alpine is I read through the documentation super quickly, and then just sort of my own quick, messy solutions work perfectly. So this is just, take it with a grain of salt. This is just my own little solution here. Anyways, in this filter function, we need to return true or false. So essentially, and this has nothing to do with Alpine, this is just a quick JavaScript lesson. Every array has access to the filter method. It's going to loop through the array, and then for the item that's been looped to, you either return true or false. True, do you want to include it in the new array that you're building? The filtered or modified array. So in order to know which pet to delete, here's what I would do. I want to know if I'm clicking on, the one that has an index of 0, 1, or 2. So in order to know that index, here's what I would do. Up in our overall template where we're saying x4, instead of just this pet, I would actually have parentheses here, so I can have two properties, pet, comma, index. Cool, so now anywhere inside this template, we know the index of which pet we've been looped to, right? Is it 0, 1, or 2? So now down here in the filter, essentially I'm just going to say, hey, return all the animals in the array except for the one whose index matches, the delete button you just clicked on. So in order to figure this out, another set of parentheses, I'm going to give it both the incoming pet, comma, and let's call it like looped index. And then in between the two closing parentheses, have the arrow symbol, and then a pair of curly brackets. You can actually drop down. No, our code will not break. You can just drop down. You don't even need a template literal. It's pretty cool. Now I'm just going to say return, and then you would say either true or false. So I'm just going to say if index, so the current pet that's been looped to, if that does not equal, so exclamation equal, looped index. So the only pet where this is going to be false is if, the pet that got their delete button clicked on. For all the other pets, it'll be true, so they will exist in the new filtered array that we're setting pets to now equal to. And just for a little bit of fun, before the return line here, we could also say like console.log. Let's have a template literal. So, 2 backticks, and I would say like, imagine we also send an API request to a URL to delete, and then, the name of the pet, like meows a lot or whatever. But to make it dynamic, like $ curly brackets, pet.name. Cool. So the idea is this just is deleting it locally in client memory. And then imagine that you were actually sending an API request to a server somewhere to delete a specific pet in mind. You'd probably send along an ID or something instead of their pet name. Let's give this a save and test it out. So here's my example page. Let me open up my console. Now, if I try to click on barks a lot, cool, we can see barks a lot's the only one that's missing, and better yet, whoops, you can see there's a message for all 3 of the animals. That's because I included that console.log in the body of the function, so obviously that's going to run for all of them. That was my mistake. Let's see, where did I include that console.log? This line, the console.log line. We cannot have that right there because that's going to run for every single item in the array. So let's cut that or move it. And instead what you could do is just right before this closing quote, but before the closing parentheses, so right here you could just paste in your clipboard, something like that. Cool, so let me save that. Let me refresh the browser. So now if I only click on barks a lot to delete them, look in the console, beautiful. Imagine we also send an API request to a URL to delete barks a lot. Finally, what if we delete all of the pets? You might want a fallback message that says, whoops, all pets have been deleted. Here's how you could do that. Back up at the very top. Right before this template that loops through the pets, I'd probably just have another template, so a template sandwich. And I'd give it an x-if equals. So if we just say pets.length, as long as the array is greater than 0, right? If it's 1 or any larger number, this would evaluate to true. So in other words, if we're looking for when there's no pets, I would just have an exclamation here. So if this is false, that means we have no pets. So then inside I would just have a paragraph, whoops, you have no pets. Let's give that a save and test it out. So if I delete all 3 pets, beautiful. However, you might notice if I refresh or even perform a hard refresh, for like 1 or 2 milliseconds, it says, whoops, you have no pets. And that's while, we're actually going to fetch that JSON, because for a split second, our array is empty. So let me show you how you could handle that, because this is also a similar approach to how you could initially have like a spinning loader icon or a progress bar icon while your data is fetching. So here's what I would do. And there's a million ways you could do this. There might even be an official Alpine way. This is just what I came up with on the spot. But on our overall div that has a class of all pets, in our X data, I'd probably just give it another property. So after the array, comma, and I'm just gonna make it up like loaded yet and set it to false initially. And then on this x-init, when we actually finish loading the data, so like right after the parentheses for calling JSON, I would just have a semicolon and then just set loaded yet to equal true. And then down here on the template for, what's going to say, whoops, you have no pets. For its condition, I would say only if this is true and, so double ampersands, and loaded yet is true. Only then should we actually ever see this message. So you could get creative with the inverse of that and show a loading spinner icon if you really wanted to, but I'm not going to bother with that. So now, even if I refresh, you'll see not even for 1 millisecond are we going to see that awkward text too early. But if I delete all my pets, perfect. And that is going to bring this video to a close. If you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy my premium courses over on Udemy. In the description for this video, you'll find a link to this page on my website, which has heavily discounted coupon codes for all 8 of my Udemy courses. Whether you want to learn about JavaScript, React, Git, databases, Laravel, WordPress, CSS, I've got you covered. Also, I want to bring this to your attention. I'm working later this year on launching a Careers in Confidence course. So it's going to be designed from the ground up for the modern web development industry. How do you actually get started? How do you build a positive mindset? How do you build your confidence? How do you know what you should focus on or what you should learn to actually get your first job in the industry? If you want to be notified as soon as that course launches, you can add your email address here to my newsletter. I promise I will never spam you. I will never sell your data to anyone. This is literally just for me to notify you when my new courses launch. Cool. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials. Take care.